On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Amie Bright. She is the VP of Enterprise Data and Analytics at GitLab. We're going to be talking about data governance, and a lot ties into GenAI, well, because we need good data, and that's where data governance kicks in. We're going to be talking about how do you ensure quality, and historically, data teams have cleansed data, and if you're a data person, you know what I mean. You've actually gone in there and fixed some of the data, but at some of these data volumes, that's not possible anymore. And governance is obviously now core of a lot of the conversations that really haven't been there before. So excited to have Amie on with us and talk to us about these topics. Amie, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for the invite.
All right. I'm assuming a lot of people have heard of GitLab, but I don't like to assume. I want to make sure everyone has a chance to tell us what who their company is. So if you could give us a high level of what GitLab does, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if everybody knows what GitLab is, so I'm happy to share that. We are an AI-powered DevSecOps platform, really here to support the automated software delivery, help boost productivity, and ensure that your applications are secure. And so it's really thinking about that full entire DevSecOps lifecycle, and allowing teams to collaborate with each other as they build their most powerful apps in the world. So yeah, that's GitLab.
All right. So diving into this topic, obviously data governance has been around for a long time. GenAI has kind of shined a whole different spotlight on it. Let's kind of talk about that. So obviously data governance has certain responsibilities, and maybe let's start with what that means maybe at GitLab, or maybe how you've seen data governance thus far in your career, and where it's now fitting with GenAI and where those conversations are going. So top level question first, data governance, and maybe we can just start with GitLab. Where do you guys inject that? How is it being handled?
Yeah, I mean, data governance for me is all about ensuring that teams are using your data correctly based on your customers' expectations, how that data is classified, and making sure that, there aren't any security breaches or anything like that on your data. And, typically in boardrooms and executive conversations, when you say the word data governance, a lot of people will get a little sleepy, or maybe it's a big bad word. At a Gartner conference a few years ago, they actually put governance up, and it became this like really problematic statement. And I think the reason is it's because it's hard, right? You're injecting new processes, you're asking team members across the company to do different things with data. Maybe they have to implement new ways of working, which is hard, and changing behavior is really hard. And the reason why that's important, obviously, is because if you want to use the data in any way, you need to make sure that it's governed data, that you can trust the information that's being inputted by the various users, and that you have no what I call like leaks in your systems as data is moving and migrating from your sources into your data lake or data mesh solutions, or whatever organizations are having. And so for me at GitLab, I think of data governance largely in the context of ensuring that we're using our data correctly, that we are meeting the expectations our customers have of GitLab. GitLab customers trust us to use their data appropriately. We make contractual based decisions based on that. And so for me, specifically right now, governance is really important in that context. But data governance specifically is a very big umbrella. And there's a lot of pieces and components in there, really thinking about not just the governing your data, but how do you ensure you have high quality data? How do you have security around your data? And so thinking about that full governance umbrella, holistically, I think is really important.
Absolutely. And I think the more we start seeing the conversations around GenAI, we're starting to see the importance of data quality. I think you and I talked about, the ability of teams historically to help clean data, obviously, and that's changed, and it's really not possible at the volumes of data that we're looking at to clean data, affect the data governance at that level, at a micro level. Kind of talk to us about some of that historical and now what has to be done to shift those practices.
Yeah, well, I've welcomed this generative AI evolution, is what I want to call it, where, we've had AI around for a long time. Data teams have had data science, teams building propensity models or different types of machine learning, deploying algorithms and things like this to make business value data-driven decisions. But generative AI for me has opened up this whole new world, right? Like we are hearing about companies offering you to put an application right on top of your source data and talk to that system in a generative AI chatbot-like experience. I was just at Snowflake Summit and they just launched a chatbot with like 4 clicks with it, and they brought somebody on stage to do this. And I think it's amazing. Now, there's a couple of things that I'm very concerned about, but I'm also really excited because it started to open up the conversation with my business users who are using data and they're so familiar with getting this highly curated dashboard experience where they can trust that data because it's been so transformed from source system, right? Like the legacy behavior of taking data, putting it into your data lake, creating a data warehouse, applying some BI solution like Tableau or Power BI on top of it, that paradigm is shifting where teams are now asking for this generative AI experience at source. And so the conversations have now completely changed, where before I would come and say, well, my team is struggling. I have to have so many resources to clean this data. This thing called a data lake is actually like a data swamp, and it's polluted because all this upstream work, all the data upstream is coming to us poor. Please, please, please help us, figure this governance problem out. And they would just be like, whatever, but I get this dashboard that's already curated for me, so I'm fine. Like is more data governance is more my problem versus their problem. And now with generative AI, it's their problem too, because they realize and recognize how efficient their lives are going to become by enabling these generative AI experiences on their source data. And therefore, they're starting to say, oh, like I want quality output coming out of this experience. Now I get it. Now I understand. Now I like all these data governance conversations we've had over the last couple of years make sense. And so it's really, for me, changed the dynamic of the conversation to where we're talking about it as, everybody's problem, and how do we change the behavior to support these types of experiences that team members are wanting to get.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess as you're kind of, this is becoming more of a mainstream conversation talking about data governance. Historically, data governance has been, as you mentioned, kind of the bit of the no police in the data world. And that image is shifting. The quality of the data is now becoming so important that people are just now bringing it at a different level to the forefront. And I guess now we might lose that no police stigma. Is that something that's going to be popping up as we have more of these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I really subscribe to Bob Steiner's non-invasive data governance, which is less about no police and more about enabling. Data governance is there to enable you to get faster decisions more efficiently. So I really subscribe to that, and I have for a long time. I do think that it is going to change. It is going to change. I think that this perception of the no or the being the police or whatnot is going to change because they're going to recognize the value. And everything that I've ever done in my career has always been about, I'm going to sneak in these little things called data governance, and you're not going to really feel it because you're going to get this like super cool thing on the other side. And I'm going to give you some value, and you're going to do a little bit of things for me, but you may not know because you're getting like all this really amazing value. And so I've always kind of put data governance and value together, which is why I think it's really important that companies think about that if you do want to implement a data governance program, if you want to increase your data management footprint within your organization, connect it to things like generative AI, connect it to the things that are valuable for the business to drive efficiency, scale, increase value, find new customers. And if you can do that, and you can connect your strategic program to that, I think you'll be, way more successful, and it will change the perception of the no police, or don't come into my backyard, don't tell me what to do and how to run my business.
I guess, the other side of this equation is measuring some of the output, and ensuring that we can determine what quality is and what accuracy is from the output. The danger, I guess, with Gen AI is, as we're seeing the output, Gen AI solutions have a tendency to make things look elegant, even with the wrong information or wrong output phrased or however way that might look. How do you start looking at accuracy of solutions based on obviously hoping for quality data inputs?
Yeah, I do think that is going to be challenging in terms of how do we measure accuracy? How do we know something's right? And a former colleague of mine was often, would often say fit for purpose, right? So what is the decision you're trying to make? And is a 50% correct answer okay? Like you can still see the trends are going up. You can see that. Is the trend going up good enough versus having to know precisely the trend, increase 35.33% year over year. And so there is this fit for purpose question that I have, and I haven't cracked the nut, to be honest with you, in terms of what is good enough. What level of accuracy do we feel comfortable enough? Within my organization, what we're really striving for now, before we sort of unlock these generative AI experiences, is how do we start to certify certain types of data sources? And we can then say, hey, you can use generative AI chatbot on these certified data sources. And that, but it sort of falls in the face of like putting something right on top of Salesforce, or being able to chat with that data directly. But I do think that if we can have certified data sources and then create an environment by which your certified data source is feeding back quality information to your source system, then you create a very rich quality environment. I know you asked me about measurement and I didn't have a very good answer for you. And it's likely just because I haven't cracked the nut yet, to be honest with you. And, thinking about how do we identify what is quality? Now, if somebody is using generative AI to create code, right, to write their SQL or any other Python code or whatever, any other code base that you can think of, it will be really important for them to do validation and checks on that. And I do think the bar for quality and accuracy is significantly higher than when you're thinking about, I'm measuring the performance of my business unit. That's a little bit different. The bar is really, really high when you're producing financial reports for Wall Street. That the accuracy needs to be super high. It needs to be pristine, right? 100% is the only way. And so, like I was saying, fit for purpose, I think, is really important to think about as we create these accuracy measures on the data.
I guess if we were to step back and go in the time machine backwards, we would be seeing a scenario where BI analytics reporting has been produced for the last 30, 40 years. Data governance was always a part of that conversation. Yeah, data professionals, we need to make sure that the data is right. We're getting the right output. I kind of find it sometimes ironic. I don't know, maybe not even ironic, but I find it interesting. I'm going to use the word interesting, that no one really talked about the importance. Actually, we all knew data quality is important, and we're producing reports based on certain types of quality. But there seems to me being a disconnect between how we view the importance of data for Gen AI versus, for the last 30 years, we're producing reports.
Yeah.
You didn't care?
Well, they did, though. I think the BI teams masked it, right? I'm not sure about you, but in my career, I would do manual manipulation on data so that it was and appeared accurate to the end user, because the source system failed us in some way. And so it was masked. They didn't have to think about it. They didn't have to talk about it because it wasn't their problem. And I think at the beginning, that's kind of what I was trying to allude to, which is, It's gone from a data team problem where your data analysts, your BI teams, your analytic engineers, your data engineers are all yelling about the fact that they have to go through so much work just to make a quality report. Nobody cares about that because that's like a data problem, right? They're just like, hey, I'm still getting my dashboard. Like, that's great. And the only time I could ever really convince people that it mattered was when I would say things like, well, if you want your report to happen real time, then you need to care about data quality, right? And we would kind of work in that. But if it's a monthly report, they don't care. Like, they don't care how long it takes you, and they don't care how many weekends you work. They really just don't. And so now with generative AI, it has become their problem. It has become a conversation where, the data quality can't be masked anymore because it becomes very real and upfront.
Absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point. I think you kind of mentioned it before about being able to help mask some of those deficiencies. Obviously, at scale, that's very challenging. And talking about data that what BI teams used to handle, they may not be as familiar with as well. Before, I think we would receive data that we would understand because we were devoted maybe to a specific area. So we understood the business and that data very intimately. So you could go in. I think now, if you're talking about data and some of the training data, you might not be as familiar. You might not know where and how to manipulate it. So it's not in the scale. So I think those are some great observations. I guess when you're looking at, the conversation of data governance,
I think it's starting to get better, honestly, especially as we have started to see the introduction of chief data officers at various organizations that are having the right level of conversations at the, with that executive leadership, and making sure that they're in conversations at the right time. So it has shifted, but we're we're still the final mile, it feels like sometimes, and there's conversations that I'm still having with my business partners to say, wait a second, you just implemented a new system and there's a new integration, and we're going to measure, and you want to measure the performance of that now, but we didn't know about it. So there is some of that still happening, to be honest with you, but I think it is getting better, and we will see it get better, especially, like I said, as business leaders start to see the efficiency gains that generative AI provides. They are going to want to include the governance organization in those conversations to really ensure that the right processes and the policies are understood, and that their teams are essentially using the system in the right way to create the right data for that experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think as we do see Gen AI roll out from this industry, and it's going to evolve. I still think, what we see, some of the mainstream, Gen AI solutions and how we interact with them, I think there's a lot of road left to get to how enterprises will really see the impact of whether it's a co-pilot, whether it's a, answer. I don't think it's going to be an answer question, but it's going to be a co-pilot, and it's going to be very interesting because as co-pilots, as we're seeing in the market, they're going to provide suggestions, and we're going to have to understand the impact and ramifications of people making those decisions based on the data they're providing. So I think, it's going to be quite an interesting journey to see the next couple of years.
And I wanted to touch on something that my light bulb went off when you were talking just earlier. The other thing that will be important, because you were saying, your BI teams were able to sort of mask what was happening behind the scenes, but when you put generative AI on top and people are able to ask a question, get a visual answer. In the past, you could caveat your data, right? I think what we're also going to start to see is more metadata management enter the scene, where data starts to get tagged appropriately. The usability and the usage around that data gets tagged so that users who are using it in a generative AI experience, they're also seeing the nuance of the data, and they're able to see some of that metadata part of it. So metadata in the past was also another one of those like snooze fest. Like, I don't want I don't want to classify my data. It's so hard, everything like that. But now it's become very important. And you don't want your generative AI product to give you information that, like PII data, that should not be visible to the average user. So you also need to make sure that tagging is there. So sorry to bring up that subject, but you had said something earlier, and I was like, here's another moment that I also think is important as we think about generative AI in the business.
Yeah, and I think, maybe even further, to expand on it, I think what I just kind of realized was we're going to come up with use cases that we haven't even still thought about. So, you mentioned, as we're seeing, let's say it is a co-pilot, the options that can be given have to potentially fall in line with some companies' industries, regulations, restrictions. So you're going to have a solution that understands, the context of, hey, I'm within, the financial, the biopharma, and I cannot provide these type of potential guidances because it's, So yeah, I think we're just scratching the surface. I think we got a long way to go. We'll have to revisit this maybe down the road, and we'll come back maybe and have you back on and talk about how some of the real world implementations going. If somebody wants to reach out to you to connect with you to talk about data governance, whether its current state, what's happening within GenAI and data governance, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, just ping me on LinkedIn. Always there. I don't know if my LinkedIn, if there'll be a link here for people, but yeah, just connect with me there. One of my passions is connecting with other data professionals, having conversations. We're all kind of going through the same thing, and there's different flavors of it, and just learning from each other, learning what works, what doesn't work. Each organization is slightly different. And I was talking to a peer the other day, and I was just like, we all have like scar tissue. So let's figure out how we can learn and share, from each other, so we're not making the same mistakes over and over again. So definitely LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll leave your LinkedIn, profile link in the show notes so people could just click on it. Amie, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it was really wonderful talking to you. Have a nice weekend.
Absolutely. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I generally think we're starting to just see the emergence of and capabilities of data governance. I think, as Amie mentioned, GenAI has shined a light on it, and I think people are going to accept it more and more as the results and impacts are seen. So I think that's some great advice. Share this episode with somebody else. Love to see what they think about it. It's a great topic, good conversation point. Reach out to Amie if you guys want to follow up on anything she mentioned. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is doing. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.